So given that we have those web services built, the next thing I'd recommend that we start with is to go install the NuGet packages that we need. So if we go to the Chatterbox project, I'd say install NuGet packages, manage NuGet packages, and what I want to grab at this point is Bootstrap. So grab Bootstrap, install that. And I also want to go and install Unobtrusive Validation. So I'm going to grab that, Microsoft.jQuery Unobtrusive Validation. Once I've done that, you'll see that there's updates on a few different things. So I want to go update all those 5 packages once those are installed.
Bootstrap validation and
Bootstrap, unobtrusive validation, and then just update everything that's out of date. Once you have that in there, go ahead and start creating a layout. You want to keep the layout relatively simple. I'll get to that in a minute, but go ahead and start that layout once you've got those packages.
what do you mean?
Huh?
What do you mean for layout?
Create a layout file under the shared folder.
Oh.
So I'm going to go shared. Oh, there's not a shared folder there, so I need to create first. Shared. And I'm going to add a layout in there. And I'm going to say MVC5 layout razor. So I'm going to call that underscore layout. As far as what goes in the body, because the 2 pages that we create are going to be decently different, that's the only thing I really want there is render body. I'm not going to put an nav bar in there. I'm not going to even put a main tag in there because I want to let the views kind of decide that part. I do need to add in style sheets and such, so let's go do that.
Did you do the template empty without a model, the layout?
No. What you want to do is right click that shared folder, say add. You're going to pick that option there, MVC5 layout page. Okay. href, this is going to be content. Bootstrap min CSS, and I need script tags. So script. Oh, I also want my style CSS. Okay. jQuery. That's what I need to do. So that's all I'm putting in my layout. Okay, so I'm adding the scripts, I'm adding the style sheets, but I'm not actually putting any content really in my layout for this one. I'm going to build a really simple login page for this. And then that's going to take you to the actual chat index page. So on there, maybe I just have a top bar, and this would be log out. Have some sort of logout button there. I'm going to have an entry here. And I want to have some sort of scroll bar there. So that's what I'm going for. Does that kind of make sense? So we're going to have those two different pages. And this is the reason that we're not putting much into the layout, is because I want this to have access to the whole page. Does that make sense? I want this to be able to completely use all the space. So let's start with the account login page. So if we think about that, I probably want to use a view model for this login page, right? Does that make sense? Using a login, using some sort of view model there. So I'm going to add a view model to the models folder, and I'm going to call it, I'm just going to call it login view model. Okay. In there, I only need one field, which is going to be that username.
What folder did you put login view model in?
It's in models.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's in models as usual. So on there, I want it to actually show up as username as 2 words. So I'm going to add that display attribute. So it'll show up that way instead of how I have the variable named, so property named. I also want to make sure that that is required. Okay, and I might also want to impose a string length, a maximum length to that, right? So what's the maximum length in our database for that username? Huh?
It was 20 characters.
It was 20 characters, okay? Okay. I might also want to have a minimum length for those. So maybe I say your minimum length for your username is 3 characters. So it's going to give you a range from 3 to 20 characters. Okay. Scott, you're still typing on that? Okay. So, okay. So that's what I have there as far as that view model's concerned. So let's go back to the account controller. So I know the initial version, initially when you go to the login page, that I'm not going to have anything there filled out. So I'm just going to mark this with the method get. Now make sure that you've renamed this as login, okay? Because that's going to be important for the stuff we do going forward. And this is going to take that login view model. So we're going to say if you don't enter a valid username, we'll just show you that login view again. Otherwise, we're going to redirect you to the actual chat page. see why I've got this here? I'm specifying that user equals username. What's the reasoning for that?
You're passing route values to the chat controller.
Okay, which is going to mean, which means what? What's that going to mean for the chat controller? And what's that going to mean for the URL?
It's
Right. So if my username that I log in with is foo, what is my URL going to look like that this sends me to?
Index, chat/index.
Chat/index, yes,
And
remember
then-
that index comes in second.
And then-
Index.
And then it would be question mark equals, and then whatever the username is set to.
So it'd be something like this,
Yes.
right? So if that all works out correctly, once you log in, you're gonna go to this URL. Does that make sense? So if I log in as foo, that's where I should end up.
So you could then change that value in the URL and it would change your username.
Potentially, yeah, and that's okay. That's acceptable for this case. I could do something more complicated with JavaScript, but I'm going to keep that simple for the moment. Okay, so now I'm going to go over, well, let's go to make that actual view, because we just have the controller. I want to make the view. So I'm going to add a new view here. This is going to be the login view under the account folder. The model for this should be chatterbox.models.login view model. So that's my model there. The title of that page will be login. Actually, I want to change this right here. So this is going to be a H1. It's going to be Chatterbox, and going off of what I kind of put up on the board. I'm actually going to change that to an 8. I'm just going to make that an H3 instead of an H2. Okay. So now for my form. Using begin form, and this is going to post back to where we're at. I need a form group, div class form group. Here I'm going to put that label and the input box. Text box 4. Okay. Make another div for my submit button. wrap this whole thing actually in a main tag. And class text.
You need to add the form control tag or class here to the
I do. You're right. So let's see. I actually want this to be container. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. See if if you're looking at it, what you may see on there, you may see that the username, kind of the label, kind of gets in the way. But the thing we don't want to do is fully remove it, because then that would be a problem for screen readers. So what we want to do, what I might do here instead, is apply the class SR only. And that'll mean that it's still there, and it's still there for screen readers, but it's hidden for the rest of our users. I do see also that I've missed the classes on the button, so let me add those. So BTN primary, and that should style that way. You might also want that to be BTN large. Yep.
Does your run it?
You're in the wrong place. And you didn't name the user, I think. So you call it B. You got login action, and it's showing the log. On the main, I added container and text separations.
So
says screen reader only. So it only shows up for a screen reader instead of showing up for everybody. Make sense? So screen reader will still see it and read it, which is a generally good rule for accessibility. You always want to label, but whether or not you show it is
Do we want to, so should we change the route config then too, so it defaults to this page?
right. So yeah, we probably want to change the route config to go to this page, because if we just look at where it starts, it's going to get this error, right? So yeah, I would like the route config to point to that page. The way I'm going to do that, though, if I go through and change this here, really I don't want to change the name of that default action. I really need that to still be index. Does that make sense? I still really want that to be indexed by default. So rather than changing this rule, I'm going to add another rule. So we're going to say routes, map route. So the name of this route, it's not going to give it a name. The URL, actually I think I need to leave that as null. But if I put the URL as blank like this, that says I'm looking at just that root URL. So what I'm going to spell out there is the defaults for that. So controller is equal to account, and the action is equal to login. So by adding that route, it'll start at the account login page. Does that make sense? And again, I don't want to change the existing route, because then I'd have to change this default action, which needs to stay as index. I can change the default controller just fine, but I don't want to change the default action.
So I have a question.
Yep.
So on the second round value, the controller says home, even though we don't have a home controller. Is that always just going to be the first one we make? Or
That's, huh?
I mean, so should that controller equal home? Or
That's debatable. What it is here doesn't necessarily matter all that much.
oh, okay.
So, I mean, I could make that account, chat, whichever.
Okay.
It doesn't really matter. What does matter that I'm splitting this off as a separate role.
And you're making it first.
And I'm putting it first. Yeah, if I didn't put it first, it wouldn't actually apply. So if I run that now, what we should see is our home page should now be that login page. Are there any questions there about that home page, how to set that up? Does that make sense? So that's a good way to force a particular page to be where they start. Okay. Next thing. So we've got a login page, and in theory that login page works. So let's just see, if I leave it blank, it'll tell me that it's that. If I type in a single character, it'll tell me that it's not long enough. If I type anything longer than 20 characters, it'll complain that it's too long. So that helps check for a bunch of things there. So I'm going to say foo, go on, and there we can see I'm getting the path that I expect. So /chat user foo. So now that we've finished the login page, let's go build the actual chat page. Okay. So for the chat page, all we need is this index method here on the controller. We don't need to actually do anything else there right now. Okay. So I'm just going to right click here and say add the view. We're going to call it index. Make sure you're calling it index. We're going to add. Okay. Now for our purposes here, it's actually going to, because we're going to do so much of this stuff in JavaScript, I'm actually not even going to have a model. Okay. Because I'm going to do so much of that. One thing, I'll take that back. There's one thing I do need to do. Remember we passed in the username? So I do need to add that as a parameter here and save it to the view bag. That's just to make it accessible in my view. So just take in the user, save it as viewbag.user. Okay. So in here, I might change this to Chatterbox. On that note, I probably should change the other page, the title of the other page to be Chatterbox Login. So that one will be Chatterbox Login. This one here will be Chatterbox Chat Room. So, top of the page, I want some sort of, what's up?
I can't see it.
Oh,
Oh, okay, that's just in there.
yeah. So, I want to have a nav bar up top or some sort of header. So maybe I'll make that a header tag. I want to say probably have a logo up there, or maybe, so let's say I want this to be H1 or H2. Have that in the header. I want to have a link to, I want a button to log out. So this is going to be a href URL.action. We want to send you back to the login page. href. I want to make this, give this a class. btn, btn. Maybe outline secondary. I might want these things to appear horizontally, right? So what could be a good tool that I could get these, the logout button on the right and the and the text on the left. Yep.
Flexbox.
Flexbox would be a good tool. Okay. So if I'm going to make this into a Flex container of some sort, what might I need to do? What's my step one?
Add vflex
To the header. So I'm going to say d-flex. By default, we can see that that's oriented as a row. So you should have something like this here, but you'll see that there's no space between those two different things, right? So I might want to add some space. The way I'm going to do that, I'm just going to have this item grow. So I'm going to have the header grow. I'm going to just say flex grow 1. That should solve that problem. I might also want a little bit of space on that header between the inside of it and the items. So maybe put padding 2. One thing you'll notice if you're looking at that, the way it lays out, does anybody notice anything odd? Yeah.
Is that logout text in the button?
Uh-huh.
Kind of uneven.
Yeah, doesn't it look a little bit off? Well, notice that the whole button's actually being stretched, right? The whole button's being stretched to be the full height of that row. And that's because we put it in a flex container. So what we need to do is change the alignment, that vertical alignment. So align item center. And that should solve the problem. Yeah, Alex?
I was going to say you can make it more mobile friendly by setting it so that at a certain breakpoint it switches to a column Flexbox.
I could. I'm going to leave it alone as is because it's going to be actually pretty good. I think, in fact, if I look at it, let's look at it in mobile. Let me go there, and let's go to iPhone 5. That's how it looks on mobile. There's just not that much that I put in the header for it to really matter that it needs to drop down. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that does make a difference if I have more stuff in there, but I don't have very much in there, so it doesn't actually make too much of a difference one way or the other. Okay. So the next thing I want in there is going to be the main section, which is where we're going to actually have the messages that we want to show, that we want to spit out. Okay. I am going to go ahead and give that an ID. I'm going to give that ID of messages because we're definitely going to need to access that tag in our JavaScript. Okay. Another thing I want to do now is I want to add a section at the bottom where we can fill in, where we can type in a message. So maybe I'll make that the footer. And for that purpose, maybe I'm going to give this one class BG dark. And I need to put a little form inside of there. So if I say using HTML.begin form. Okay.
Bless you.
I'm going to have this as an actual label tag. So label, this is going to be message. I want to have my input type text.
So what made you do it like a regular label and input this time?
I'll get there in get there 1 second. So ID the reason I'm going to do that is because I don't have a model here, and I want to have it be, I want to be able to customize it. I'm also going to go ahead and add a class to there, which is going to be screen reader only. So we're not actually going to see that label at all.
Should we have a default value in there then, on the text? Like,
On the what?
on the text box, like an enter message here, default value?
That would not be a bad thing. I wouldn't use a default value, but I would use a placeholder.
Okay.
Okay. Default value meaning would mean that there's actually text in there already.
Okay.
Placeholder is just grayed out and it goes away immediately when you start typing. So the placeholder might be enter message here. And on that note, it's probably best if I use that same text in the label. Okay, so I'm going to have a button as well. That button's going to say send. Button type submit. Okay. Now I haven't added any bootstrap on most of this stuff yet. Notice I haven't added a form group because it actually would be better to set this up as what we call an input group, right? So if I set this up and I'm going to say class input dash group, if I just look at what that looks like, so far we've got something like this, right? Which one thing you'll notice, hey, that main section's kind of disappearing, isn't it? Right, so there is something that we're going to need to do about that main section because right now it's height 0, right? So, but first let's finish working with this part. So the input group, I need to give this input a class, and that's going to be class form control, just as usual. And that's actually enough to get it to span the whole width. I also need to add a class to the button. So this would be btn, outline, dark maybe? Let's see if that works. No, it needs to be light. And I want this to group in there, so input group append. Is that right? I think I'm missing something. Well, a little bit of padding around it. I think I'm missing something on my input group. So bootstrap. So for an input group, oh, okay, I need to put it actually in a div like so. That's what I'm missing. So
There's
input.
also prepend.
Yeah, so that's prepend, there's append. So I need to put those things in prepend and append. So that actually needs to be in a separate div. So I'm going to put a div around the button, which is going to be input group append. And I'm going to do a similar thing around the label. And have that be input group prepend.
Wait, shouldn't that go around the text box?
No, because the text box is effectively in the center. Actually, I take that back. I don't think I want that. I don't think I even want that in the input
Like,
group.
if it says her only, then doesn't that mean it's not visible?
That's right. So I don't think I actually even want that in the. Yeah, I don't even want that in the input group at all.
What now?
So I don't want the label to actually be in the input group. I want it actually up here, because otherwise the left-hand side of this is square instead of rounded.
So you took it out of the div?
I took it out of the div and moved it up.
So the input and the button are just in the input?
Yeah, so the only thing that are in the input group, there's input, and then there's the button, which is wrapped in this input group append. So if we hit send here, you'll see it's still trying to go to chat index. That may or may not be what I actually want it to do if you hit send. So I may actually probably want it to go to that service that we built the other day. So I might say point that at send message. However, if you remember from yesterday, remember that it needs two inputs. Remember, it needs not just the message, but we also need to pass in the username. So I'm going to put a hidden input up here. Input type hidden. Name is equal to user, and the value, remember we put it in viewbag? So it's going to be at viewbag.user. So that way if you do submit the form, at least it'll go somewhere sensical. So if we try that with that set up there, did I save? Oh, I something up. It's going to chat length 11. Okay, so what happened there exactly? So I submitted it.
Oh, nice.
Uh-huh.
Do you have a username?
I don't have a username right now, but it's still odd that it's showing me as length 11. So looking at my form, oh, my form has that in it. Yeah, my form's being set, the actual address here is being set to /chat length 11. You see that? That really shouldn't be that way. Oh, because begin form, it's treating that send message as route values. So I need to actually give it a controller name. So I just need to have that be send message chat. That's my problem. Yeah, so more likely you're going to get a 500 error if you actually submit it. If I do put in a username into that URL, or let's say I go log out, foo, I've got the username there, let's say test, and we can see that that message is sent. So that's what you should see if you go log in and then go through here. You should see success true, message sent. Yep.
I got a little four. I missed anything.
So type in a message. That's right, send that message. Because now you see it's in the flash. Yeah. So for whatever reason we're getting a 404, just simply because you don't have that. Cool. Yep. Let's make sure that you're logged in first. So you do have user test. Okay. Let's run it with the debugger attached. So we're trying to look at the output. No concern. Oh, forgot the action string filter. Yeah. Go to your web config. I don't know what that is manually. Yeah. Yeah. You should have gotten that error yesterday. Oh, you didn't get that error yesterday. Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, for now. Because we haven't hooked up the JavaScript side of things, right? So here we're just testing it using just a regular HTML. Okay. So we've got most of the HTML written. There's one problem that we still need to fix before we go on to all the JavaScript stuff. So when we're looking here, you'll notice that there's no space for the list of messages, right? There's no space here for that. So we need to extend that main to occupy all that space in between. Anybody can give me a suggestion for how to do that?
So a minimum height.
A minimum height to what?
The body.
The body?
Instead of fixed bottom, you put it.
I could, but I do want. The problem with doing that is that maybe I don't have as much control about there being a scroll bar and such in the middle.
I'm guessing you would want send to be visible regardless of where you're scrolling at, so maybe it would be better if it was fixed, if it was in a fixed position at the bottom.
Again, just like I was telling him, we could fix both of these things on the top and bottom, but it's not necessarily going to work the way I want it. Yep.
Could you also use Flexbox?
I could use Flexbox, and that's the route I would take. So if we take, yeah, so if we take all of this, the entire document, the entire page, and put it in a div. So everything, the header, the footer, the main, wrap all of that. If I wrap all of that in a div, then I can make the whole page a Flexbox. So if I use Flexbox there, I can make this deflex. Big thing to remember there, if I make it deflex, immediately is going to go to be a row, right? So if I just leave that as is, we're going to see something not very friendly, which is going to look like that, right? So immediately I know if I make it a Flexbox, I need to also make it a column. So flex column is what I'm going to do there. So that's going to keep things vertical, and then what I can do from there is I can say, we'll give the messages, give the main, give that a class of FlexGrow 1. Okay. Yes?
Do we need to change the header to be FlexGrow then? Because won't that break what we did earlier?
No, it won't. Because Flex only applies one container level deep. So it doesn't change what's inside of the header itself.
Also, there's an issue with that, in that will use the height of the body, but the body will only be as tall as it needs to be.
You said what?
Uses the height of the body to calculate when using the flex column, so
correct.
The body will only be as tall as it needs to be. Correct.
So far, I can put kind of a loading message in here real quick. And actually, let me just make that a span. Span class, make it font italic and text needed. So just to have a loading message in there. Okay. Yes, that's going to still be a problem that it's not going to occupy the entire height, right? But I am close in the sense that all I have to do now is make this outer div be the entire height of the screen. So if I say I think I say VH 100, that's going to set it to 100 VH or 100 height units.
I think you have to do min VH 100.
No, I wanted exactly VH 100 all the time. Minimum VH would say it has to be at least to that, but I don't actually in this case want it to ever be taller than that. So yes, normally min VH is a good idea. Here is not. Here's a case I wouldn't use actually min VH. One thing I can see for sure, I definitely want some margin on the main section. I'm going to go ahead and add that, padding P2. So I've got that laid out, and that should put us at a pretty nice place as far as getting all the basic CSS and HTML laid out. Okay. just by a show of hands, is everybody at the same point with where their view is now? Okay, all right, good. So we're all at the same place. So that's everything set up from the HTML standpoint for the most part. I may want to do a little bit more here as far as styling, just to make sure that that scroll bar shows up all the time. But at least I've got a starting point here. So let's go and look at that JavaScript. There's still some stuff I want to do with the main, but we're going to add some JavaScript. So you remember when I talked about the render section yesterday? Remember that we need to put this script tag in that section. So section scripts. And by doing that, this is going to ensure that it shows up in the right place in the layout.
I think you misspelled scripts.
I did. Okay. So we're now in the world of JavaScript. Okay. So what I want to in the end be able to do is be able to send, be able to get the messages from the server as well as send messages. So I might lay that out by first writing two functions to do that. So I might say load messages. I'm going to have one function named load messages, and I'm going to have another function named send message. And one of the reasons that I'm going to do it this way is because there's going to be more than one case where I want to call this load messages function. So I'm actually going to have potentially 2 or 3 different places where I want to call it. Okay, so that's why I'm going to go ahead and give it a name. Okay, so we want to say we want to load messages. Let's start there. So if I want to load messages, I need to go to the server. I need to call that web service that we built yesterday, right? So in order to do that, remember on the chat controller that both of these we've marked as posts, so they only get access to them via post. So I need to make a post request from here. So I'm going to say $.post. And what's that first argument that I need to give to the post method?
URL.
It's the URL, right? So the way I want to give that, I want to make sure that I use the URL helpers. So I'm going to say URL action, and that's going to be send, or no, get messages. Okay. So I'm going to say get messages, and then when that's done, I'm going to be able to run some code. That code's going to take some data that's returned. If it fails for whatever reason,
Thank you.
I may want to get some, I want to do something about that. Okay. Now, what were those parameters that I get in the fail method? Looking back at the handout from yesterday. What are those parameters that I get in the fail? Because there are 3 parameters I'm getting. Should be on the second page of that handout from yesterday. Yep.
JQXHR.
Okay.
Status and error thrown.
So XHR, the what? The text status?
Text status.
And the error thrown. Okay. So in this case, because I don't really want to bug the user with that, I might just do something as simple as saying console.log text status. Or console.error, I think I can actually do console.error. Yeah. So that's just going to log it on the console as an error. So I can look I can look that up later if I need to. Okay. So as far as done is concerned, what I should be getting back is what? A list of messages, right? And specifically, if I look at the model there, I can see what the name of those parameters are going to be. So I'm going to have an ID, I'm going to have a user, I'm going to have text, I'm going to have a set timestamp. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to take that data that's been output to me and somehow write it into that messages section, into that main section, which again I've given it ID messages. Okay. So the first thing I probably want to do is clear out anything that's there, is make sure that there's nothing actually there. So I'm going to say $messages dot, actually, well, I don't need to do that. I'm going to take that back. I might say clear it out like that. I actually don't think I will need to. But that's one thing you might start with. The trick with that is it's going to, if I do that, then it's going to completely flash the screen. But I may not actually end up needing to do that. So I want to show that to the user. And actually maybe if I do .empty, so there's two different ways I can go about taking this data and turning it into HTML that I actually show to the user. One way is I could just do a for loop through the data. Another way I can do it is I can use a map. Okay, and a map's actually going to be a lot simpler in this case. But let me run through it with the for version first, just so we can kind of see both.
Is this ES6 JavaScript?
Which is? Map?
Yeah.
If I remember right, that's an ES6. Yeah. It's relatively new. I don't know if it's officially part of the ES6 setup, but it's in there. So let's say I do loop through there. I'm going to say var var message and data. Is it in or of? That's a good question.
It's in.
It's in. Okay.
Are you sure?
I think it's of. I'm gonna say it's probably of.
That's why we use map instead.
Yeah. Well, one of them works with dictionaries, and one of them works with, one of them works with objects, one of them works with arrays, basically. I can't remember which one is which, but I think of is the one that you use for arrays. So if I say var message of data, then I can go through each of these and create the div. So if I say to,
I mean, if we're using ES6, we might as well use lat.
I might as well use lat too, yes. You're right. And actually both of these should be const. So one thing to know as far as that's concerned, on the newer versions of JavaScript, and you may have seen this, your first semester, you probably didn't. If I'm defining a variable in JavaScript, remember that it's not a strictly typed language, so I don't give it a type. Okay, so it used to be that the way I declared those variables would be var x or whatever. Okay, so that would create the variable. The problem is that that variable is scoped to the block. It's not scoped where you would normally expect in C#, or most of our high-level languages. And there's a lot of other just issues with it. So it's highly recommended that we don't use var anymore. The other two options I can define variables is going to be const. So I could say const x, or I could say let x. The difference between those two, if I say const, then I can't change it after I've given it a value. So const says I'm going to give this variable value, and then I'll never change it. Let says I can change it afterwards. Okay. Now in this case, both of these can technically be const, because why? Because every time I go through this loop, I have a new variable, effectively. Does that make sense? So I'm not actually reusing this, even though it's in here in div, and it's going to have a different value for each loop. It's going to be a different variable every time. So I can't actually use const here. Now, we want to build up a div, and we want that div to have a few things. We want it to have the username, we want it to have the timestamp, and we want to have the message. Okay. So I know for sure that I need to start it with a div tag and end it with a closing div tag. That's for sure. Okay. So every message that we output is going to have that to begin and end. And then I probably want to include the username first, or sorry, the timestamp first. So I'm going to actually use a template string here, which, remember, that's to use those. You've seen template strings in C#. There's a similar syntax that's been added to JavaScript, and it looks a little bit different. So those backticks, by the way, you gotta get them. They're in your top left. They're on that tilde key. That's how you're gonna get to those backticks. So first I want to say message.sent. Okay. And then after that, I want to have in there would be, actually, let me put that in a span. And then I want to have another span. And that would be the user. And you can see this is getting a little bit long. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of break it here. Like so. And it needs to be an uppercase U. Okay. So that's going to be just my basic first cut of how to spit out the message. So that's going to build up a string. That string is going to be a div with three little spans inside of it. Okay. So I need to obviously add that to the messages once I'm done here. So I'm going to say messages.add. And we're going to add that div. So that's one way I can set this up. And let's go ahead and run that and see what we get. So if you refresh the page, you'll notice that nothing has happened yet, right? So we've defined this load messages function, but we haven't actually called it anywhere. Does that make sense? So I've defined the function, but we're not actually calling it anywhere. So in order to do that, I need to add a line down at the bottom of the script to say load messages. So this is going to call it when the page loads.
Can you kind of break down what's happening in the load messages function?
Yeah, I can. You got a hand up?
I got a server error. Something with the script section.
Okay.
Yeah, here's the same thing.
Yeah, check your layout. Under section, scripts, required false. Is there a closing curly brace? Okay, that's it. Okay, so you see it? You did it there. So you see it says that there's no script section. Go look at your layout. What do we call it here? Scripts with an S.
Oh, did I have it?
Yeah, we just have script.
It's supposed to be script section.
So you see it saying, hey, I can't find a script section in your layout.
Gotcha.
There it goes. Cool.
Everything else is up to par.
Okay, so I think we're still missing something because it's still coming up blank for me. So let me fix that real quick to make sure that there's not an error in here before I go through and explain that. Because it may be that my JavaScript is wrong. So it failed to load main CSS. I know that because I don't have a main CSS and I don't have a main JS yet.
Could we maybe go on a break?
Yes. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's come back at 2:25. Okay, yeah, that's what it was. I just need to call append instead. All right.
whole point of this group was to try and like make friends and connections and how to make something that's low commitment. Yeah. Yeah. Like, I am really sorry when you're
So the answer ended up being I needed to put append here instead of calling add. That's what the problem was. So if you switch that over to append instead of add, you should get something like this.
Wait, how did you load it?
Hmm? Load what? So the trick is that needs to be append instead of add. I always get those two confused.
Which one is it?
When you run it, the screen.
Yeah, that's what you should see. But it looks like you have, oh, that needs to be uppercase U for user. That's what your username is.
So we're going to format the data?
Yeah, I believe so. But we'll need to do that.
Spots.
Yeah, that'd be it. We're not actually calling it. You'll see that it's still got the SE message in there because you didn't call empty at the beginning. See, I've got that first line in the script that said empty. Oh, yeah, you know. Yep.
On controller, is that lowercase too? That's okay?
It doesn't actually matter, but yes, I have all lowercase.
So when I ran it, I still got.
But that's fine. You see how it's not saying undefined. It was saying undefined, and now it's saying one test user. Those are all uppercase. These names need to be uppercase because of that. Okay, so let's walk through what's happening here. So at the end, we're calling load messages here, which is this is what's actually going to trigger this function, this to happen when the page loads. Okay, so we're calling the method. The first thing we're saying is go to a post, right? Go to a post to that URL. Does that make sense? Now remember this part here, that's Razor, right? That's C#. Yeah.
No, I wasn't able to get any through here.
What do you mean?
That's just blank.
So what is it? Go look back at your code. This needs to be in that loop. The append needs to be in the loop.
Okay.
So if I look at how this actually looks in the browser, let's go view page source. If I look at what actually is in the browser, note that what's there is not actually that Razor syntax, right? So that part is run on the server. It's not run in the browser, okay? So that's one thing to kind of keep straight. So what the browser actually has here is just /chat/get messages, okay? So I'm saying go do that, and then I'm saying when it's done, here's the logic I want you to run. If for some reason it fails to run, go do that, okay? So for instance, if something happens with where it can't connect to the database, or my name here is wrong, so like I said, get messages fake, that would come down here, right? Because there's no actual URL with that. There would be a 400 error and it would come down here. Yep.
So I'm actually still not getting anything.
Okay. Does your code match exactly mine? Because I'm going to guess probably not. So first thing I'm doing when I finally get responses back is I'm saying empty, right? I'm saying clear all the messages in that div, right? So anything that's in there, throw it away, because otherwise I'll end up with duplicates down the line. Okay, so get rid of everything that's there, and then I'm looping through each of the messages that we got back in the data, because remember that's coming back as effectively as an array, right? So I'm looping through that array, and for each of those messages I'm generating this div tag, right, and then appending it. Yep.
What if you use like single quotes instead of that tick mark?
So if I use that single quotes, these are just treated as $ and curly braces. It's not a template string. Does that make sense? So it would literally be the characters that I typed there.
What was
See?
that called again?
The template string?
Yeah, or the carrot looking thing.
Yeah, the carrot. Or
I call it brave or something. Brave.
okay, maybe I
You might not necessarily.
I'm not necessarily heard that term, but yeah.
So the done function data.
Yeah. So data is what came back from the server. Data is what the server sent back, right? So if I look at chat controller, here's my get messages. You see I say return JSON? That's where I'm sending back this array.
And that's getting, so that's sending the array of messages from the server to that.
To data here.
And then it's using it in that done.
Yeah. So data is that array of messages that I got from the C# side.
Okay.
That's what I got from the controller. Okay. So that's one way to set things up, and that's using a loop. If I want to switch this over to use map, I'm going to comment that out. We'll keep the empty part, but what I need to do then, it kind of changes the way I order things. So the other way I can do this is still going to effectively involve a loop, but I don't have to write that loop. So if I say data dot map, actually I want to go back here, and what I'm going to say in here is I'm going to say message, and I'm going to map that message to this div. So map will work on an array, and what it'll do is it'll take every element of that array and transform it however we want. So I'm transforming the message object into this string. You can see these two approaches are very similar, right? They're very similar, but this one is a little bit maybe more concise.
So what does it do differently?
Well, the end output is the same, right? The end output's going to be the same. What we're doing here, we're saying first map the message to a string, and then add all those strings to the messages down.
The map is, it basically runs a loop for every index in the data array.
Every index in the array transfers it from one type of array to another type of array. Makes sense? It goes from an array of messages to an array of divs.
Basically like select.
Yes, it's actually the same thing as select. Select and map are actually the same thing. So I'm transforming one thing into another. Now, you had asked about formatting, right? So just checking real quick that this still works. We'll check that real quick, and then we'll look at formatting. So I still get the same output as I had previously. Okay. So I might want to format this to be a little bit more user-friendly. So starting with the user, I might want to put a little colon there after the username. I might also want to format this date somehow as an actual date, as an actual time. And the way I need to do that is first I need to turn it into an actual date object, if I remember right, and then I can output that. So first thing I want to say is new date. And that is already not happy. JavaScript. I need to try that. Let me try that instead. So date, parse. Maybe that's the one I need. Nope, still not that one. So what format does that need to be in? Because if I just run it through, if I run it through the other way, I'm getting invalidate. Here I'm getting NaN. So clearly there's something I'm missing. Okay. Oh. That part's not working as well as I would have. Number 3 schools. Date. So the constructor, I thought the constructor took it in that format, but I must be.
There's a string format, there's an hour, and yeah, there's
Creating date objects. Oh, milliseconds. So it can take it as milliseconds. I'm kind of surprised that it's outputting it the way it is if it doesn't take it back in that way. So I can create it if I take it in as milliseconds, then I can actually turn it into that. Which if I look at what I had, so that's the way it's outputting. And if I had just this portion in here, I could take that in. So I'm sure there's a way I could do this in JavaScript. What I'm going to go back and do, though, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change it on the server side to give it to us in a more, maybe a little bit more friendly format. So if I go up here, I say dot select. And there I want to transform things. So I want the ID. I don't want to do anything with the ID. The user. Actually, this can just be x.user, x.id, x.user, x.text. And what I need then is to transform the sent date. So let's say I try to format it the way I wanted it. Actually, I just want it as HHMM. Because I really just want the time portion of it.
Uppercase H, lowercase m.
Yeah, uppercase H, lowercase m. Now, if I actually run that through Postman, it looks like I'm actually getting an error in that process. Let's see. Or actually, I don't even need Postman. I'm just going to stick that there. So I'm going to put a breakpoint here. I'm going to say run this with the debugger attached. And there it is. So under the network tab, what it's telling me here, so linked to entities does not recognize the toString method. So one of the things you're going to see there, basically, this part, it's still trying to turn that part into SQL, right? At that point, I'm still trying to turn this into SQL. So at there, I can't easily do a formatting, if that makes sense. I can't easily do a format at that point because it has to be transferred into the formatting basically has to be done in SQL. Does that make sense? Yep. What were you saying? Dalton?
I think I could.
Okay.
So when I ran it with the debugger, it didn't trigger.
What do you mean it didn't trigger?
Well, whenever I logged in and then I type in a message.
Yeah. So what I need to do to kind of get around that is the point is I need to do this formatting in C#. I need to do it after I've actually gone to the database to get the data. Does that make sense? So the place I'm going to get that, I'm going to move that. So var messages formatted is equal to messages dot select that. So I'm going to remove that from up here. So it's going to look a little bit like this. And I'm going to pass down messages formatted instead. That's just one of those things when it comes to date and times, you have to know to format them in the C# world rather than trying to format them in the SQL world. What's going on now? There it goes. So assuming you formatted it this way, assuming your index is still just message.sent, you should have something like this. 1342, etc. I've got my time, I've got my user and a colon, as well as the message.
I'm still not getting anything.
You're still not getting anything. Messages. I'll take a look at it. What's your index number? Oh, no, this needs to be just message.sent. No, I was just going to see your index level to that.
Is page size in here?
Yep.
100 or what did I say?
100's fine. This needs to be an minus. Not a minus. I can't answer. Kirk.
Kurt.
Kurt? No, it's Kurt.
Kurt Cobain.
Are you 80? No.
That should be just message.
What did you learn? Who is he?
So you're going to format a server.
That's not for the rock group. What rock group?
Yes. I guess I'm looking around here and the differences, like the for loop.
The reference.
Still not. Never too old for a good color guy.
I wasn't a big
But I guess one of my bigger things, I guess, is just instead of the full.
Oh, this was Jesus rap?
Yeah, they do say that.
But don't be
You can do it either way, but the more modern way to do it is using math. So you can do it either way. The reason why I went through both of those is just to make sure that you can see that's kind of what's happening. This looks, you don't see a for loop happening here, but there still is one, right? Because map still does one. And there may be cases where if it's something more complicated, that may be valuable, right, to do it that way.
So is it set up now to military time?
Yeah, right now it should be in military time. Okay. So we may want to do a few things with formatting it, making it look a little bit better. So if I apply a few bootstrapped classes to that, that's going to make it look a little bit better. So if I say class here, and maybe we say this is text muted, that might be one thing. I might also want to make the username bold. Or is it just bold? No. So what
It's
class?
It's font weight bold.
Ah, that would be it. So font weight bold. Yeah, that'd be it. Unfortunately, I don't get any intelligence there for it. That at least separates things. One thing we'll see here, which order are these messages in? Which one's the newest message? The top one. Okay, let me see. Let's just check. So if I type in a new message there, see, so the last message I typed in is showing up at the top, right? That's not usually how you want a chat client to be, right? Usually you want the last message to be on the bottom, right?
I got 500.
Huh? Okay. But I still ask questions, so. You usually want the message to be on the bottom, right? So how can I put that last message on the bottom instead of the top?
Just do order by instead of order by sending.
Okay, so that's one idea. And you mean on the controller side?
Yeah.
Okay, well if I say order by, how is that going to break? Somebody else tell me why that's going to break. Okay.
That the get messages could be used on more parts of the site.
No.
Actually, it's gonna break.
So if I just switch this over to order by, what would be the problem? That would give me the oldest 100 messages instead of the newest 100 messages, right? So I need that to be ordered by descending so I get the most recent messages.
Can you do another order by after you take?
I could, that would be rather inefficient.
Yeah.
What are some other options? So Alex, you had your hand up?
I already said what I was going to say.
Okay.
After you take, can you do a dot reverse?
That would be more efficient than doing another order by.
No.
That would be better than doing another order by, but that still maybe isn't my best option. So what I'm going to say is I'm actually going to leave this side the same, right? I want to actually do this. I'm actually going to do this on the JavaScript side. Okay. So on the JavaScript side, I've got kind of two options. I could reverse it there, or I could use Flexbox. So if we remember here, let's just say I make this messages dflex, and I'm going to make it a flex column. And actually, I'm going to make it flex column there. Flex column reverse. That will flip it upside down. So I can actually just use Flexbox to flip the whole thing upside down. That's actually the easiest way to do it because it's now also at the bottom. Problem solved. Any questions on that? So yes, I could use a reverse in there to reverse the order of it, but as it turns out, it's just easiest to use Flexbox to reverse it here, because that also puts it at the bottom, which is what I want. I also want, because I want the messages to be at the bottom of the page. Huh?
So I got that same error.
Do we just need a
Yeah,
call over?
it's not actually go hit lockout.
Instead of close to use
Great. So there you go. Close those all their tabs. So rather than opening up any tab,
So right now,
every
it's
time
like,
you run, just
when you send the message,
I know it changes
you're
not
not
logged in.
being
Okay.
sent to.
That's fine. So you can see the software.
I told you, I had a mini conversation with myself yesterday when I was going a little insane.
Otherwise, you're looking at bugs. You're also not sending back
I was
messages.
losing.
You're just
I was
sending
losing
them
it.
All I wanted was I wasn't logging. What were you saying?
I've lost my train of thought.
Just like
Correct. That's the next thing. So we've got the we've got it laid out in such a way that we have the messages actually showing up the way we want them. We'd like to also set it up so that we're not, being sent to another page when you hit send. So we've kind of started that process, right? So I've shown you how to write load messages, right? And that's sending a post query. Any guesses as to what we need to do in send messages? Probably going to do a post, right? So what I'd recommend, we want to hook this up first to respond to that form being submitted. At the moment, I haven't given an ID to that form, and I'll need that in order to change what it does when it submits. So I need to fill in a few more properties on the form so I can get down to that HTML attributes. So form method, there it is, new ID is equal to
have to do the ampersand before the ID? The @ sign?
Just like this.
Right, but when we're passing HTML attributes there.
No, it's only needs an ampersand. Remember, if it's a keyword, class is a keyword. It only needs the ampersand if it's a keyword in C#.
Oh, okay, I do what you're saying.
So that's going to give this an ID of send message form. Okay. So what I want to do with that is I'm going to hook up some jQuery to respond to that form being submitted. So at the end here, I'm going to say $@ #send message form dot submit grab the event Actually, I probably don't need a, no, that's fine, I'll leave that as this. So when you hit send message, I need to tell the user, I need to call, when you submit, I want to go ahead and call that send message form. And I actually want to pass in the things that I need. So I need the text, and in here I'm going to need the user as well, right? So the easiest way for me to get the user is to create a little variable up top. So I can say user, const user is equal to @viewbag.user. So this is going to take the variable that I have from the C#, the Razor world, and get it into the JavaScript world.
Can you just do @viewbag.user?
Huh?
With viewbag.user the same thing? @viewbag.
I could, but I'm going to want to do some things with this variable. So I actually want it to be a JavaScript variable. So when you say send message, I'm going to say go do thing. Really, I need to finish what's down here. So we want to get the form. We want to get the value that's there. So const text is equal to $. So that's going to give me the value that's in the text. And then I can say if you did enter text, then let's go ahead and send that message. The reason for that if is I don't want the user, I don't want it to try and send a message that's empty. So if it's empty and they just hit enter, it won't actually send the message to the server.
So is that using an ID text?
Huh?
Is that using the ID for text?
Yeah. So if you look at the HTML here, you see as specified as ID text. That's what the ID I gave to that field. Yeah. So grab that control, grab the value inside of that, and if that's set, then we want to send the message to the server. Okay? So that's the basic layout there. I'm going to set this real quick to just give us an alert. So that we can see that it's working. So if I try that out, If I leave it blank, you'll see nothing happens when I hit enter. If I type in test, you can see that it comes, there's an alert with the message I typed in. And one thing you'll see there, so it's giving the message, that's fine, that works. Notice that it's still keeping the value in here, right? So I may want to clear that out as soon as you sent a message, which I can do that up here, or either way. So I can do that here. Yep.
So should we reload the messages in the send message function, or when that submit
Yeah.
is happening?
So I would reload it after the submit has gone through successfully.
Okay.
So once it's gone through successfully, we can call load messages, and that would reload it, right? So in here somewhere, we're going to need to call load messages.
So,
Yep.
so, so I'm trying to comment this out so I understand it.
Yep.
So on that, the part below load messages, so that's just preventing it from sending if there's nothing in there.
So
It's sending if there is.
yeah, so we have a bunch of things happening. So we're handling the submit event, right? And then we're saying, don't do anything with the form. So the form never actually submits, because we're going to submit the form ourselves. So as far as this concerns, their message isn't actually being sent anymore. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
It's not actually being sent, because I've told it not to send it. Okay, and then I'm saying, go grab the value, don't do anything with it. If it's empty, just stop there. Right? And that's just for testing purposes. I'm saying show it in alert and then clear it out. Okay, so those. Yep. What were you gonna say?
If it's not empty, if it's not empty, it's getting the value,
Yep.
and either way, it's preventing.
So if it's not empty, then we're calling this function. We're not calling this function if it's not empty. I mean, if it is empty.
Okay, I'm good.
That makes sense?
Mhm.
We don't even call the function if it's empty. Okay,
Okay.
so that's where we're going to kind of start that. And what I'd ask you at this point, I've kind of given you some of the tools. I would go start this, finish up the send message yourself. You know, you've seen how to do a basic post. You've seen how to do this. Find a way to make that work here, so that send message actually sends it to the server. So I'll leave that part up to you for now. It's just kind of an exercise.
About the alerts.
Mm-hmm. So give me the tools for that. See if you can make that work. Right now it's not doing it. So what I want you to do is fill in this, implement that send message. Actually go do the posting and go send it to the server and then reload the list of messages.
Confused as to why management views anything.
Because you don't have quotes.
I just
That
add those
has to be,
there.
yeah, that has to be quotes.
It's still there with the 3 books there.
does have to be in the quotes, because that's necessary for the.
Oh, now it's just next.
Yeah, that's fine.
Well, just the Visual Studio. Oh, now it's I thought it came up.
Okay. Because that, what you have there is fine.
Right.
It does have to have those quotes, otherwise it doesn't get turned into, otherwise it's not valid JavaScript.
Okay.
So recognize, what are you doing here? This is in C# land. Those variables are
Oh
both
my
JavaScript
God,
variables.
Ooh.
Those are both JavaScript variables. That's why I mentioned it yesterday.
Yeah. I didn't see that.
Does that make sense? Can you do it like this? That's the postage. You're saying $dot send message? What should that be? It should be $dot post. You see how we're posting?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? When you post to this way, there's no send message. Over there.
Should that be? What if I don't have this together?
What you haven't been done is right. Yeah, it'll run, but I would strongly recommend having the fail so you can see what happens. But that done is not right. So what I would start, just have your done, you just alert the data. Just show the data and alert. Start that. So
You
you're
never read it done.
Go back to done. So you just copy and paste all this code. All that code doesn't make any sense now. It's not what you want. So just say alert. Or should you? You want to see what data you got back. See what happens when you post it. So, send message form, that makes me think that it's not actually handling. So it's not handling that. Yeah. So it should be doing that. That's how important is spelling.
It's always a failure, right?
Very important. Spell consequence.
Yeah, nothing happens.
Nothing happens. Right? Well, we didn't want to fail. Right? So we definitely need to add that fail to see what's going on.
So right now we should say that this needs to
Yeah. So I'm going to hit post.
So with that, you can comment out those two methods in the send message.
Comment those two ones.
There you go. You want to get it to actually post.
Post the message and then refresh the message. Did you put that fail in?
Trying to find the right spot. When I put it, I don't know if it's my formatting or something. When I put it in here.
Scott?
So you're doing trial and error. Trial and error is not a good way to go about that. So read the code and see what it's actually, how is it actually structured.
Where do the curly braces at and where the parentheses? Where the semicolons?
So, where's the message for example? It's not displaying, but response.
So something in your syntax. And you see you're never finishing it's done that way. It's never actually finishes. So this right here, change style. Well, actually you've got two things going on. So first of all, you definitely don't want to duplicate that. See right there, you're duplicating what you're doing. So if we look at how this ends, right, you see you've got a curly brace here you've never terminated. And start by just doing a worked and showing the data, because then you can see if it's actually working. Right? Because if that comes back, that pops an alert that says, hey, success, message sent, you know that it went through.
I'll post on the 500 error.
Okay. Well, let's go look at your code. So you told it to send the message, right?
Yeah.
Did you tell the message or the user to send it for you?
Yeah.
Now remember, you can't do it that way because that's in the C# problem. You wouldn't have the message set. You can't use route values. If you use route values, you're in C#.
Yeah.
These are JavaScript values.
So I can't use this.
No, you're starting right. Remember, you need to pass in as JavaScript parameters, not as route values.
Okay.
Yeah. So there you can do the curly braces stuff.
So no.
Yeah, it's actually no new. You just leave off work. You just saw it a minute ago, right? We're getting this automated.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I was thinking we were returning the data that was being.
No, that's not what we're saying.
Yeah.
So, duplicating activities.
Right.
So, but you still need to have it.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So you say, when this doesn't do a thing, if it fails, do another thing.
Question.
Mhm.
Just, we're submitting it and it's come back to this, why not just have this incorrect, back to this, and then that way.
Because then that would cause a whole page refresh.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The whole point of this is to avoid page refresh. Right? And actually, the way that would work out, internally, when you get a refresh back from this post, it will follow that redirect, and what you'll actually get is the HTML, rather than getting that, the JavaScript, the JSON that we got back, you'd actually be loading the entire page. You'd actually be getting the HTML for that entire page, because it will follow the redirect immediately.
Alright, got it to work.
So you need the alert.
Also noticed is that even though load messages is before the alert, it still happens afterwards.
That's fine, remember it's asynchronous.
So it just does it in what the order is capable of.
No, because the only thing that you're doing at that time
Yeah.
is sending out the post.
So what date are you posting?
Remember, this is asynchronous, so this whole, this message, load messages, finishes before either done is called or fail is called.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
This returns before there's an actual answer. That's why.
Okay, so if I was to have an alert that said the message was sent, should I have it await so it'll only display?
No, you just need to put it, no, yeah, the way you had it was right. The place you had it was right. But I wouldn't have an alert in there at all,
Yeah.
because it's just not user friendly.
Mm-hmm.
If you had an alert, yeah, you'd have to basically wait till
Yeah.
that's done. Which means that you would have to, effectively what you would have to do is you just have to say return this, and then you'd have to say then blah blah blah. So you use promises to make that happen. So you have to exploit the promise structure. So yeah, so you have to return this, which returns that from this thing, and then you can say then should be good.
Okay.
Stuff. So it needs a user and no. Okay, so this done is when it's done. When it comes back to the post. That's always going to be done. Always going to be done. What you need to post is to pass those, send them to the server. Post is where you send them the request to the server. So in post is where you do that.
Oh,
So remember, yeah.
You already have enough.
So you pass those things. Now that has to be sent as an object, so you actually bundle those two pieces into an object. Go back and look at the handout that we had from yesterday, you'll kind of see that. Thanks for the long term.
I just finished, I just gotta remove this. Should I just do like a console, well, instead of alert, just to say a message was sent?
Sure.
Like use a comment, leave this done, callback, empty.
Yeah, that's, well, what you're still gonna want something in that callback.
Right.
Right? Now, the two things I would put in that callback is to load the messages, and this actually should be down here, because I don't wanna clear out the message if you fail to send it.
Right.
right? Because right now the way you have it is it's gonna clear out that message even if it fails.
Right.
Right? And I only wanna load the messages if it succeeds.
Okay.
Right, so both of those things should be in done.
Alright.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So you should have some stuff there.
Okay.
Otherwise, you potentially go drag the messages too early, because like here, it's actually gonna go at the same time as it's sending the message, it's actually after.
Send message right here.
Oh, so then you can like a huge discrepancy there.
Well, it just means that your message might be sent, but it doesn't show up.
Didn't show up, right. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, refresh the page. It work for me?
Yeah.
You guys building Amazon.com yet?
You
got one more month.
You still send message, but it doesn't
Yeah.
know the user or the text. So you have to pass it in message on.
Well, yeah, I had to go back to the document yesterday.
Well, you gotta think about it, like, you gotta be posting something to the server, you know, if you're posting
In the
nothing.
action.
We remember, because I had no idea what this is.
Well, yeah, and you go,
As a direct.
like somehow that C# is gonna have to get parameters through JavaScript too. So,
I'm confused, so where do the user text at?
user is that concept.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
so where do you text?
Text is the parameter of the send message.
Of the send message.
Send
Yeah,
message.
to send,
That.
The function
Right
you're
here.
already in.
and that's being passed in when the event is called. When we go back, if you go back down to the
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise it takes
It's
send
some
message,
concept
okay,
there and
it
then
doesn't know what
pass it
to
to
say.
Okay, so then I forgot
So
to
that's-
here's the text box.
Would that be enough?
we already had that. You already had that written down.
Did I miss something?
Okay, so you know how to do that.
It's also, it's just a
So,
text, and you can put it.
get your text box
Put
and
text
locate it.
in,
How do you grab it on it?
Text.
Pretty much.
Alright, so gigabytes, how do you,
Yeah.
my box?
I will just type it. Or what?
I'm the user.
Wait, what are you doing?
Oh wait, I did that.
Yeah. There you go. You can just clear your text box after it's done.
Maybe, so I'm not.
Oh, you need to set up a cost.
So
You
should
only
that,
want to clear it.
that should be on this one here, or down here.
Maybe try.
You can do whatever you want.
Control F5.
Do it when you.
I
inside the method.
I did it inside the document.
So this, right down here.
On the send message document.
Okay, so it's not, it's a run
I
somewhere.
did,
because
yeah.
It's not giving you the same message.
Yeah. You should. I don't know. Is he thinking about sequencing like? You should reload messages here.
The send message to server?
So how do you grab an element?
That's the right stuff.
What is it? Let's prevent all, this is all.
You're already preventing something from there.
So what is it doing right now?
Nothing. Well,
Guessing it's a fun error. Okay, you can go to console and see your errors.
I think empty though will
More than
empty
likely.
the HTML. Or the
Console.
raw.
So
You wanna, you only wanna delete the text that's inside that.
Like empty will
So you
delete the
just-
stuff.
Look in here, so it's
Size
trying to do a send
You
message
just keep-
equals 500.
No. You do it just through a method.
So this right here, your
So what
syntax
is,
not
like the
right?
text inside, what attribute is that?
So
Like what involved user type, do you have an?
Inspector.
It should be
Yeah,
user
find
type.
out what attribute it is. Okay.
It's your user. You also have a user value. Well, because every time you hit run, you're looking at a new page, and it's on this page without having to go through the login process.
Also somehow.
attributes
user
are.
after text, I didn't use the colon.
Yeah. And the val method, you can just leave it like that.
Keep that fail in there.
Oh.
That will get the value.
Yeah, you need
That's what that message is, though, right?
So that's gonna alert, and that's just gonna return the same value from in there.
Same
But the thing is, if you wanna
So
set,
if you switch that over, there's two things.
It's an overloaded function, so there's one that's a getter and that's just
list of messages.
with empty parameters.
And
Instead,
it
you
needs
just
to
put
clear
the
out
text
the
value
text
inside.
that's in that box.
And you want the value to be empty, so yeah, that's what it is. So while we set, yeah. For your,
So where you're at,
I always forget to add some
That's on the
like,
C#.
Python?
because of Python, yeah, it's so annoying.
At that point, you have no idea what users typed in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you need to actually do it in the JavaScript.
So, when you're passing the object,
I'm wondering how to do it.
I wonder if it'll still fail if you put like an int in there.
So after that.
Random objects.
I mean, you can have
When we look at this here.
Oh, right, let's say I put like,
After that, put a comma.
God, this is, I can't think of a non-stringable object. I mean,
Yeah,
let's say
now
put like
you're
a,
in Java world, your JavaScript world.
an entity.
The other place you were
in
still in
there
C#.
for whatever reason.
What are the parameters?
Will it still fail because?
So there you have to do the code braces.
Right,
and
but
there
like,
you put in the data.
I want, just out of curiosity, I want to change this to be.
For JavaScript?
Any issues?
You said break?
You know, because like it should save the text as the username and the username is the text if it's following the same. Oh, that's not.
He was thinking he could do some other
I don't think the order of the parameters actually
Huh.
matters.
What
No, it doesn't.
does the name of the parameter matter?
The name of the parameters matter, that's all it is.
Okay.
It's that shorthand for text colon text.
Uh-huh, right. Okay.
It's sending it as name text and name user.
The name of the, in this case, you're just using the variables.
Because it's the same name.
Yeah,
the
if
parameters.
there were different names, you would have to use the colon, right?
Right. Okay,
Or
that
if you want to
makes
say
sense.
user free,
Mhm.
you just say user all. But yeah, there it's automatically going in that.
I already undid it.
Okay,
It doesn't matter.
yeah, so I think most people are up to speed. Let's go ahead and take a break and come back at the 50.
So you got yours to send, so you are clearing, using a reset, and clear.
I actually need to go too.
Yeah, so just send the message, you want to clear the text box, the value.
I'm missing something.
Put that in the, so that's still object, like, in your index.
If you're just asking for the code, you're not going to learn the zero.
I'm not asking for the code.
Okay. But that's what I hear.
What am I? So in the index, I guess, could it be before stop?
Yeah, you can really do it.
So, when you post it, that's when you, so clear after you post, yeah, would it be, use the value method? Okay.
Console error text status. It says there's, it looks like there's a syntax. So can you just save this real quick? Just make sure it's saved.
So when you send the message,
Refresh.
clear, and then
Make sure we're on the same thing. So
and
actually,
the actual method is the function as a message with clear. And then just send.
Did you do that after or before the fail?
So,
Before the
something about that first.
Or you could see
what
what
actually
actually
went
went
on.
on.
Actually, send
So do you remember how you clear value?
It looks like it's coming back
Reset,
with 500
just
errors.
do value and then empty string. That is it. clearing the text field, right?
Yeah.
So go back.
So,
Erase that. So, what are you selecting? You're selecting the text field, right?
Correct.
So say $sign.
here?
Yeah. Send it button. And what are you selecting? The tag? Or what?
Text.
Yeah, text. Well, it's gonna be quotes.
Interesting. Yeah,
And
so
then,
there was just a little typo.
so you're selecting the
Yeah,
text.
I didn't see that.
Get the
That's
value.
different. I forgot.
Or set the value.
Alright. Expectation. Okay, cool. So you can remove that whole word.
Yeah, I'll
Value.
So it becomes about
That's
three
about-
to five years, right?
And you, correct.
And that clears the field.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can do it in there.
What's not working? You're really close. So what's not working?
Okay. But it didn't refresh, right? It didn't, like it doesn't show your message here. Right? So hit refresh, you can see it's there. So it did get sent, but it didn't load, it didn't automatically refresh the list, right? So let's go back here, right? So let's remove this, just so it's not bugging us about that. How can we refresh that list? Remember we wrote a method right up here to refresh the list. So can we just call that?
Or we can just call the function load method?
Right. Okay. Switching it now. Okay. So message is sent, we got it here. Okay.
So still add the load button?
Nope, don't need a lot of parse. Cause that's all you want, right? Normally when you use a checkpoint, it doesn't say you want it every time.
I do have a certification.
Yeah.
So it's required and 27 as well as
Yeah.
non-statewide.
Yeah.
So we probably just leave it alone.
Probably just take it off. I was just wondering like what year is it from, but yeah, probably not relevant at this point. Well, actually, it is relevant. I would leave it on this side, even if it's not, I would leave it in on the side that even though it's kind of going away, it says that you got it at some point, which that's work.
Yeah.
That's a fair amount of work to go get a certification, even if it's not valid, it means at some point you knew that knowledge, which that's still an accomplishment. So even if that's not the case, I would still keep it, but it would say what year you got it. Because it's still valuable to know, well, how old is that culture, right? If that was like 2 years ago, well then, in theory, you're pretty fresh on that. Which, given how close a lot of things in Windows 7 are with Windows 10, a lot of that information does carry over. So, it's still something I would list.
Yeah.
Simply because the amount of work that it takes to do that, and it does mean you have some knowledge that not necessarily details. How are you coming along? So what is it doing right now?
Trying to look at how it's trying to, well, create a function, trying to clear the text.
Uh-huh.
Now I'm trying to post
Yeah.
from a user in the text.
Yeah. Norton, maybe, no. Okay. So something came back and that indicates to me that it was successful. So hit OK. And refresh the page. So your message was successfully sent. You see that?
Yeah.
So you're pretty close. So what would you need to do to reload the messages after it's been sent?
Call this load.
Yeah. So
And then
what would you call that?
inside this function.
Where?
Inside here.
Right.
Yeah.
But you don't want to try and reload it until you know the message has been sent. Because otherwise you reload it before you sent the message, it won't show up.
So I don't even need. And then this one is.
That's when the page loads.
I see.
Right. That's your calling it when the page loads.
See, I'm not. I don't want like just the code. But where
No.
is it in the notes? You know, like I'm looking at the notes.
You're putting pieces together, and the point is you're almost there. It's not about the notes. It's about what does the software need to do.
Right, but I mean, if I don't know the correct, format.
No. I mean, so there's a difference between like knowing the tools, right? What the notes are is I give you the tools, right? But the trick is knowing how to then use what you know to put it together, and that's a skill that you have to learn. Not by reading. That's a skill you have to learn.
Yeah, I think I just, like, I found this page and it's pretty close. So what I'm wanting.
Can we test this before we get too distracted on that? Okay. You'll notice it's not clearing it out.
Okay.
So this is the code that you were trying to use, right? What's wrong with your selector there?
It's
looking.
or
No, look. So it's looking for a tag with type text.
Mhm.
It needs to be ID text. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, I would recommend moving this down into here. Reason being, you don't want to clear out the messages they sent if it fails to send.
Okay.
Okay? If they fail to send the message, you don't want to just throw the message away. You only want to clear it out once you know, okay, yes, it's been sent.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Yeah.
That's why I'm saying, at this point where you were at, you're mostly there, which is why I was thinking that you were looking at somebody else's code, is because it's really just like,
Yeah.
put a few lines, where do you put those lines?
Right, like I guess I don't even know the correct way to approach it. I have no interest in, like, I want to learn it too, but I just don't, I bet that a lot.
There's that skill of knowing, okay, you have some tools, knowing how to put them together, and that's a skill you have to learn. And again, you can't learn that skill just without doing it yourself.
Yeah, I know it's true, but it's like
Like reading all the articles in the world, all the Stack Overflow answers will not help you pass that step. Does that make sense? Because at some point you have to take the knowledge you know, the knowledge you found, and put it together. So it's what we call problem solving.
well, I just don't have a full breadth or understanding of all of it, so that's why I do need to read something. Like, I don't, this stuff's not gonna just appear in my head.
That's your dream.
One of them.
Shoot higher, girl.
It's like,
Dream bigger.
it's like for a wedding gift you give her. That's it.
Honeymoon.
That probably was some people's.
So I've got that up and running. And I think that's how most of you have it set up. One thing I will say, so kind of looking at where you guys are at, one thing for sure that I notice that a few people don't have, so let's say I hit enter, it's going to still say focus on this box. Notice if I click on the button, on the actual send button, that the focus doesn't go back to the text field. Right? So oftentimes another thing we need to do in here is to just put focus on it, which can be as simple as just adding here. So I say clear it out and then make the focus, set the focus to that control. That will solve that problem.
Should the user be specified that way, like the user : user?
You can do it either way. The reason I'm going to write it out this way is just to be more clear. If I just put user in text, that's a shorthand, which that shorthand doesn't always work. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Okay. The other thing I'd like to do, and I know a lot of people run into this, is, well, if I'm still on this page and I'm not logged in as a user, right, I get an error when I actually go to send messages. So I'd like for this page to actually redirect me if I don't have, if I'm not logged in as a user. So one way I can do that, I can say if not user. So I could actually do this in JavaScript, because sometimes you may need to redirect in JavaScript. Okay. So if I say window.location is equal to URL.action So window location is where your address bar is currently. So I can set that in JavaScript to actually send you to a different page. So that's going to say if you don't have a user that you've entered, if you haven't told me your username, then just redirect you back to the login page. Questions on that? Can you see what's happening there? Okay. one of those many reasons that I'd like to have the user variable in the JavaScript world. Okay. So we've got that all done. So we can now log in and we can send messages just fine. But what happens if we've got two different users here, right? So let's say I'm going to open up two tabs. So I'm logged in here as Mario, I'm logged in here as Boo. If Mario says jump, well, it shows up just fine here. It hasn't shown up for this other user, right? How can I solve that problem? How can I set it up so that this user now sees the message?
You could have load messages work on a timer so it automatically refreshes.
That would make a lot of sense, right? That would make a lot of sense. If I put it on a timer, then yeah. Then I'll get to see it even if I'm not the person that posted it. Because otherwise I'm just sitting here refreshing the page again and again and again, right? So if I want to solve that problem, so the method in JavaScript we use to set timers like that, well, it's just set timer. So no, it's not set timer, set interval. Set interval. So if I say set interval, the first thing it takes is a function that we want to call at that specific time, which is going to be load messages. And I need to tell it how often, how long do I want it between each time it calls that. That's in milliseconds. So if I say 1,000, that would be every second. If I say 10,000, that would be every 10 seconds or so. So just by putting that in, that's going to say, go grab the new messages every 10 seconds. So let's try that. I've got a bunch of windows open here. Let me close. Well, there's the one I want. All right. So Boo and Mario. Type a message in here, and within 10 seconds I should see it over on the other side. Did I miss something? Yeah.
So I've heard of WebSockets.
Uh-huh. WebSockets is a great tool. I won't cover that in this course, but that's actually a great place. This is a great place to use a WebSocket rather than that polling loop. So what am I missing? I told it to do that.
Load messages.
Load messages. That's what happened. Typo. Go figure. There it goes. So problem solved there. Yeah, so the downside, as you kind of mentioned WebSockets, the downside of doing this, right, is I'm hitting the server every 10 seconds and asking for all the new messages, which that can be a load on the server. Yeah, doing a polling loop can be a load on the server. So yes, WebSockets is a better alternative to that. I've also heard of people using something called Signal R. But both of those are things that are kind of out of scope for this course. But yes, so those are better tools here, but this is enough to kind of see how you would set that up, because sometimes you need something simple like that. Sometimes that's all you have available to you. Any questions on there? So we've kind of seen how that goes together. That's where I want to end it today. We didn't get into any of the sports store stuff, which I'd kind of like to look at, so we'll look at that tomorrow. But you can see what we've done there. And hopefully get started on maybe some of the labs. I hope that's gotten you a little bit of intro, enough to know a little bit about posting stuff to the server and things like that. But we'll look more about how to do some of the stuff on the sports store tomorrow. But I think this is where I want to end with that application. Any questions on this online chat system? Or does that all make sense for people?
Is there more notes online or
What do you mean?
further examples?
I mean, a lot of it at this point is just putting things together, right? You can go looking online. It's kind of sparse as far as this stuff is concerned, because a lot of it depends on what combination of tools you're using, right? So some tutorials may work for you, but the odds are that they may be using a different combination of tools than what we have. So I've given you kind of the different pieces to go together, and I've given you the theory bits. The rest of it is really just around application kind of stuff, domain specific stuff.